Hi everyone, welcome to Type Talks. Today we have all NT types. And so you might have noticed that we already did an NT panel video. And so I'm planning to redo all of the thematic videos and to do them with a new set of people because it allows us to hear new responses. It allows us to hear new answers to the questions asked. And so this allows us to kind of figure out what is really the core of these types and what are the idiosyncratic differences between the individuals. And the best way to figure that out is to interview multiple people and to see what stays consistent. And so like what is a core type trait and what varies depending on the person. And so I hope you enjoy the second version of the NT panel. And so Lauren, would you like to tell us a bit about you?
Yeah, so I'm Lauren. I am an INTJ, and I am a critical care clinical pharmacist on the East Coast.
Fantastic. And Boris?
I'm Boris. I don't stutter. This has become my online name, Boris. I run a Toronto-based MBTI group, which is kind of N-friendly. Others are welcome, but it's a home for people that have an N in the first or second function. Also, we include OPS, so if somebody is a jumper, that's cool too, but everybody's welcome.
Excellent. And Josh?
Hey, I'm Josh. I go by Vazzaroth online. And online, I'm a YouTuber, and I just make videos about kind of random stuff. A lot of times it has MBTI, cognitive function related content. But in my real life, in my day job, I work in a moderation company, an online moderation company. And I'm an INTP, and I'm looking forward to this.
Yay. And Deon?
Hi, I'm Deon. I'm an ENTJ. What I currently do for work is I am now officially a financial advisor. I just became that not too long ago. And I also do stocks on the side at the moment. So.
Very cool. And so Josh has a YouTube channel called Vazzaroth, which is a really grand spanking cool name.
Sounds like a video game, Dungeons and Dragons or something.
Yeah, pretty much. I came up with it when I was getting into D&D when I was like 14 or something. So it's served me well so far.
And hi, my name is Joyce. I'm a certified MBTI practitioner, and I facilitate the instrument in organizations, and I type people. So NTs, what are some traits you would all hypothesize that you share in common? What bonds you all as NTs?
First thing that comes to mind is that we don't have feeling in the first two stacks or slots. So I would think that that might cause issues in our life in general at times.
And on the flip side, you can say also, I mean, especially in work context, I find dealing with NTs, it's simple. I mean, I'm ENTP, I could be a jumper, so T and I are close together. But it is, in a work context, it's somewhat refreshing because we don't have to watch out for accidentally tripping on somebody's feelings. Now, I think I'm pretty good at not doing so, but it's nice to be hands-off and just say, let's just discuss the facts, and you have an opinion, I have an opinion, but okay, we're not going to get upset because we're just exchanging opinions, right? No intention of hurting anybody, and less likely with a fellow NT.
Yeah,
I agree.
I agree with Boris. Oftentimes as an NT type, you can come across as argumentative, and it's not really like that. Like, it's funny because one of my best friends is an INTJ, and we can literally be having a heated debate or discussion, and people literally think we're arguing, and it's not. And it's like the very next moment we're laughing. So I really Boris when I say that about NT types.
I think that in getting back to the dichotomies, obviously we're all thinkers, and so all of our decisions are based off of thinking, whether it's TI or TE, and that's kind of where you get the nuances. But I would agree with Josh and Boris and even Deon that oftentimes when we have discussions with thinkers in general, it is more based on facts, maybe something that's a little bit more tangible, or maybe not tangible because that's not so intuitive, but things that are not so feelings based. Yes, we are feelings kind of blind in some regards unless you develop this over time. And then as it pertains to intuition, we tend to be more abstract, counter to what I've just stated. So whether it's an I or an E, we tend to focus on, patterns, maybe meaning, because I'm an I and just my bias, but typically patterns. So I would say that that's what conjoins us.
I think probably like Boris talking with other NTs and kind of like what that allows you to talk about that you maybe you can't always do that is, and I'd be really curious for the INTJ and ENTJ if they agree. But I think the thing that I find when I talk to people who are kind of like similar to my type here is I can talk like pretty theoretically, and people can generally follow along pretty well. I know when I'm speaking to like a generalized audience, a lot of times I always remind myself I have to have like examples of things, because sometimes I can talk 3 or 4 concepts deep and realize I'm not really attaching it to anything concrete, and I lose a lot of people. So I think that's probably something that I look forward to when I know I'm going to be talking to like NTs, even TE NTs and everything else. So
yeah, I agree. I definitely agree with that. You can the conversation NT types is very like you're always kind of like, I know for me as an ENTJ, I talked to you about this before, Joyce, it's kind of like forward thinking. So it's like the conversation is almost like I'm in my natural habitat. So it's like we're always talking, I always find myself in other NT types talking about future oriented things. But they're also like in an abstract sense as opposed to more of a sensory sense. So for example, we could be talking about, just something random like accidents, like how many people make accidents throughout the day, and it's because they're not thinking ahead. But I only really get that. I only really know that if I'm talking to an NT type versus any other type. So that's something that I personally experienced.
Intuition. So when you have higher up NI or NE, there is a future element to it, because NI will want to future pace the future. It'll run simulations. And for NE, it'll also try to think about futures that aren't existing right now. And so sometimes it'll have like a what if this or what if that, but it still has a type of future orientation or even an orientation outside of time. So it's almost like in a parallel universe or in a metaverse, like if this happened. So there is this element of being outside of the present moment. So it's almost like you're evading the present moment and more in the realm of ideas together as NTs. And so there seems to be this quality of theorizing you all have, of strategizing or understanding or trying to bang blocks together to try to understand things more. And it might come across as a little blunt or argumentative, but it actually is because you want to understand what truth is. It's this ability to say things a little more straightforwardly, but for the purpose of deeper understanding.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
cool.
That's one thing I was going to say as well, is that I feel like when I'm talking to NTs, I know that I'm kind of talking to like fellow truth seekers, and that's kind of like above all else. So there's sort of certain ways you can approach things and certain things you can say, knowing that, in my opinion, that like I can't always, even when I'm talking to like an NF or something, I can't always approach it that same kind of angle. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree, Josh. I have my best friend. We grew up together, and before we even understood this, I never knew he was an INTP. And oftentimes I get told that I'm too blunt or that was too insensitive, and I never really mean to come across like that. It's just that my communication is always about trying to find honesty and truth, and especially since I can see it. Like I won't even date a girl if I feel like I don't see a future with her. So like if I see certain things in the moment and my head goes, I won't want to bother with her in the long run, then I just will cut it flat. But compared to I think most types that will give things more time, like I just can kind of see it. So I'll just take information and then I'll just kind of go like, yeah, I can see that happen, or they did this, and then I just won't do it anymore. So but oftentimes like I can kind of talk straightforward and have some truth and come to more of an agreement when it's other NT types, like I said, if it's compared to like an SF type or NF type as well.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You kind of see the future pretty clearly and you trust in that. And so it's kind of like you don't have to try it to know. You can kind of just know before trying it whether or not it'll work out with some degree of certainty. Right. And exactly. I hear that a lot from NTJs, or maybe this also applies for NJs in general too. It's just this ability, because you can future pace with NI so well, sometimes you know the outcome before the outcome happens. And so sometimes you might not even give something a chance because you already know how it's going to turn out. And even giving it a chance will just prove what you thought was going to turn out anyway.
And look at
that's
like exactly.
Can I throw something in there? Because it's a question I might want to see if there's a juxtaposition between the TPs and TJs. I mean, truth for me is a relative concept. It's sort of a thing of the moment. I seek truth, but I never believe I found it. And I'm very willing tomorrow to throw it away. And my goal is more, it's a journey. I want to get closer to the truth, but I will never proclaim I must find the truth. It's my objective, but it's a quest. I wonder if INTJs and ENTJs are more, no, I want to find the truth. That's my goal. I got to get there somehow. And then when I have it, I'm really happy because I also paced my life the way I wanted. I get exactly where I want to be, and I'm really, really happy. I don't think that would be happiness for me. I'm getting closer to the truth, but it's almost, I like that it's an asymptotic experience. I will never get there, thank God, because that would be the end of new experiences. I wonder if INTJs and ENTJs are a little different there.
I would say yes. Me and my friend, my other friend, he's an NP type. Something I realized is a key difference between TP types and TJ types is that you guys always need more and more information. Whereas I think TJ types, we kind of want to diet out because it's too much information. We want to just use it and go. I've always said that, like, one of my favorite quotes by Bruce Lee is use what is useful, discard what's not. Because that kind of helps me cipher out information to make it more useful. And I'm kind of like, it's not that I'm closing my mind off to more information, but it's more so like I don't even have time I want to bother with trying to figure it out because nothing will get done. So I'm like, I need this much amount of information. And if it's the most complex thing, I want to break it down to here and use it and go about the way. I don't want to keep trying new experiences because I can never feel like I can learn something that way if I'm just stuck on more and more information or detail. I don't know if you kind of experience the same thing, Lauren, being a TJ type, but I think that's the big difference.
Yeah, actually I would kind of maybe disagree. Maybe this is an idiosyncrasy with myself, but I hear a lot of TE from, your perspective, Deon, in that you're kind of sussing out information and very much taking on a what is effective approach. And I would agree that at some point you have to fall down on some sort of answer and some sort of quote unquote truth. And maybe this is just my NI going off on a tangent, but I would actually agree with Boris in the sense that truth is relative. Like, let's do a mind challenge right now. So if we were to convince everyone in the world today that today was Saturday. Today's not Saturday, right? Today's Saturday.
Not? I thought it was.
Then,
say so.
The ENTP jumps right in on the lie.
Give me one. I'm gonna grab my charger from my phone. It doesn't die. Go ahead, though. I'll be right back.
Sure. But if we convinced everyone in the world that it was Saturday today, then all of us would agree upon today's Saturday and that we could progress as such. But not. We all collectively agree upon the fact that today's Tuesday. And so truth in some regard is relative. And that usually is my NI kind of going off on a tangent. You could take this in almost any aspect, whether it is, especially when you get into nuances such as religion, like specific types of cultures that and traditions that we hold to. And so you could go off in a lot of tangents there on what is truth. And again, I would say that it's relative. However, you always have to come down on an answer. You have to, and that's usually where I have to get myself out of my NI and kind of do what Deon is saying. And you have to take action. And because of that, you have to suss out kind of excess information. So I would say truth is relative. I don't think that truth is empiric in any regard.
I think probably one of the main distinctions that I'm kind of detecting between like what Boris said and what I'm thinking and what the TJs are saying is that take action part. I was wondering I was wondering if Boris was already thinking this, because the way that you guys are like, and you have to take action every time, I'm like, well, you don't have to. you don't have to come to a conclusion about certain things. But I understand there's a lot of good reasons to. But in my opinion, that's kind of how I see like TI and my own mind is I'm always the way that TI works. I'm always open to like any possibility, at least thinking it through. But I have a kind of a part of my psyche that doesn't want to say that there's a best way. There's just a way that gets this result and a way that gets this result and a way that gets this third result. And then maybe some things that happened unexpectedly in between. So I agree with Lauren, truth is subjective. But I also think that the fact that like the TJs are looking for what path to take is a different, and maybe Boris can disagree, but is a different kind of like thing of what we're looking for, the reason why we're looking for truth, if that makes sense. I'm more looking for it for like having a way to think like correctly. It would be the best way I could probably describe it with off the top of my head.
And to maybe suss this out a little,
No, it's okay.
suss it out a little more is, I kind of agree. You have to live in both worlds. This is an aside. I really work well with INTJs. I said it in other panels. Before I even knew MBTI, I had 3-4 friends in school or otherwise that I would gravitate towards, people that I would work with and get really almost impossible things done. Later on, they all turned out to be INTJs because there's a nice synergy to have that mixture between TE watching TI and E and I.
I have very similar stories as well. Yeah, exactly with INTJs.
I mean, yeah, and what I wanted to ask is, I admit in real life you have to achieve goals. So I like goals. I pick a goal, but for me a goal is just the thing that sets me going towards something worthwhile. But if I had a project and it works really well from front to back, I would hate it. So I like projects that are really complex. I know this is the way I'm going, but I look forward to the little disruptions. I believe maybe, especially in ENTJ, INTJ might say, no, if I could have it my way, I plan it, it gets done, I'm done. I don't need that extra stuff. Am I mistaken?
In a sense, so it's funny because it's like for me being T first, introverted, intuition second. It's funny because I can see things from everybody's perspective, but it's always about just like kind of like what Lauren was saying, like what's the most effective. So I can take people like I'm often on like different teams and things like that where, and I've been on teams where I know who's the best suited thing to get something done, even if they're better than me at it. And I'll say, you do this, you do that, I'll do this, you do that. And it usually comes together pretty well. And that's why I'm just kind of like all that. It's kind of like all the information that the NPs gather. I always look at that kind of secondary because I'm like, I see what they're trying to get out there. I'm always trying to like make the things that people are kind of dreaming of or that information, trying to put it out there in the least time possible. And so my mind is kind of like sequence thinking. It works in phases to be able to get things done. So it's not so much far as it just being truth. I'm very result oriented. So results is what really gives me the clear cut answer, especially in the moment. So if I say, I saw how this affected this person, or I saw how this affected the entire bigger picture of this, then I kind of determine whether or not it's actually a real answer. It gives the real answer or not, as opposed to just, I would say like if you're a TI thinker, where it's kind of like, well, in my mind, that made the most sense. I'm always kind of looking at it from an external standpoint of what seemed to actually work in action for everyone there, and what result did we get in the moment to prove if something was true, as opposed to just trying to make it where it's an individualized truth as opposed to what's just standard truth of what we actually can see and go about doing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think at least with TI, it's like I always say in comparison to TE, I'm willing to accept more results. I'm not as focused on like a singular result, even though it's like an introverted function, but it's branching paths and yeah, like we were talking about for me.
Nice, very nice.
Josh, I find your perspective interesting whenever you mention that you can see multiple results. And of course I would agree. And I would echo what Deon was saying about how we see almost everyone's perspective, especially having an I as my primary, and my primary cognitive function. But it's funny because in my head I say, yeah, but the sun rises the next day. Like you have to make a decision because what else do you provide society if you just have these multiple options. And I'm thinking kind of in the context of, my context. So maybe being in the hospital and you have a patient and you're trying to decide, are you going to give them this anticoagulant because they've had multiple clots, or are you afraid to give it to them and then increase their risk for clots? And so there's like always these risks versus benefits that you kind of weigh, and there is no indecision. There can't be indecision. You have to come to
and high stakes like that for sure.
End result. And so I think the same goes for life in general, is that you have to choose some sort of path at the end, because again, the sun rises the next day. We all move, and we have to move based on something. There has to be some sort of foundation. Not to say that you can't go in multiple different directions, but
yeah, I think that's. I love that you're bringing that up, and I think that's a perfect like juxtaposition of what I'm trying to say. Where like, I've known for a long time like a high stakes job like that is not for me because of that exact reason. Like I'd be more than happy to be like a researcher and like follow multiple patients and stuff like that. But like by no means do I want to be the guy on the hook for making the decision at the last minute, like on what's actually going to be done. For me, it's like there's like a puzzle. I can't remember what it's called, but it's like a puzzle where like there's a string and like it tangles up with a bunch of stuff and comes out on the other side. That's how I always understand the way that my like TINE function works, is I can see where the strings are. I can see where they come out. I can't always see what's in between, but I usually can like quickly match up which one to which. But then I think it's because I have feeling last. I have a big problem figuring out which string to like pull, if that makes sense. And it's not just because I'm always wanting to data gather. It's because the way after thinking about this for a long time, it's having those feelings last for me means I don't know always what like the result I want or even FE people would want from me. So then I get kind of in a decision paralysis, which I think is a little bit different than like a ENTP would get stuck on something because maybe you want to do more like data gathering or something, but Boris might know better. But yeah, anyway, that's how I see like TINE, at least for me.
I would say that what you mentioned, it's a little different for me. I think I can more relate to what Lauren and Deon say. It's a question of degree. I'm comfortable cutting things off, and I'm comfortable making decisions under duress. I might probably delay a little longer than you do, but for me, I mean, TI being second, assuming I'm not a jumper, I have no real issues with it. I just would probably delay more than you, because for me, I do like the journey. I pick a goal, but the journey is still something I appreciate. Whereas for you, wouldn't it be, if you have a project, if you could get it done without any hitches by the deadline, you'd probably be super, super happy, right? I would be a little sad because I missed out all the struggles in between the hero's journey, right? Sorry, Joyce. I mean, I might have, I didn't want to interrupt. I think I interrupted you earlier, and then I got this on a tangent here. So I'll be quiet.
No worries, no worries. Yeah, and so there seems to be a theme of open-endedness versus closed-endedness here. As you see, the P types, they have an open-endedness to them. So that might be why they collect an endless stream of information. It's almost like you want to try to collect as much as humanly possible and delay a decision until you have to make it. But like the open-endedness is where you get your juice from, keeping it open-ended. Whereas like the J types, they do like to gather information. Of course, like the INTJ leads with a perceiving function, so they're going to want to gather an information. But at the end of the day, there's a close-endedness to J types where they're going to want to close the loop. It's like, okay, eventually you're going to have to close the loop. And so the focus, especially with the TE, so especially with the ENTJ, is to like close the loop and to go, we need to get this done. We need to make a decision in the external world and get things rolling. And so that's a theme that's coming up. And so I'm wondering, how would you all kind of tell apart these four types? What are some tells of your type, would you say? How would you be able to kind of spot your type?
I would say you're probably dealing with at least a P type if they end like half of their sentences with, oh, but nothing matters anyway, or something like that, or, oh, it doesn't matter. Like, I feel like as an INTP, what I end up doing a lot of time is going like to my wife or whatever, who's got NI first, going like these really long tangents. And like, she probably thinks I'm like leading to something. And like, I kind of am, but also like, I don't feel like it's like that important. So I kind of just like trail off and just go, just kind of go, but never mind. So I don't know. Maybe that's an IP thing, perhaps. I don't know.
I would say more often I can really determine my I usually I don't run into too many INTJs personally, but when I do, or if I see it in a movie, I can point it out right away, or a TV show, I can point it out right away. One of the things I kind of notice is the straightforward, direct kind of attitude that they have when I do see it. So it's like, it's funny because I was watching it was my first time watching 300 the other day, and one of the characters, the main character, I think was like an ENTJ, and before I even knew it, I'm like, man, I really like this guy. Like, I like how he plans everything. I like how he's, just kind of taking control of everything. And sure enough, after watching the movie, I found out that he was an ENTJ. So one of the things you'll see often is the need to make sure everything is in order and planned, but it's also to have a very direct approach behind it, meaning that they won't allow anything to interrupt whatever plan or thing they have going on.
I do find ENTPs, and this is not to pat myself on the shoulder. There's one guy at work. I mean, he's an ENTP. It's pretty obvious we found each other. We're like, wow. It's sort of a nice combination between, he can be totally on subject, you're open to what's going on, then you crack a joke, and you jump back and forth between being dead serious and goofing around, and it's sort of on cue, you understand each other. So I really like dealing with ENTPs, but we have to be sure that we don't waste too much time on something that's not on subject. Because just today I had a conversation with a fellow, I'm sure he's ENTP, but then I'm the one who normally reins him in. It's like, hey, you know what, we want to get something done. But I love this, being able to effortlessly switch between joking around, goofing around, cracking a joke, 2, 3, 4, going back on topic. That's one thing that for me often says fellow ENTP. That doesn't mean I favor them. I mean, I like other types. ENTJs, I think, are fairly easy to tell. They're normally the senior management types that I can talk to, and they have an open ear. They have a vision. Like, often they're very high up and they like to get shit done, but it's saying, look, I can achieve something for you. These are my means. They very quickly get what can be done. Whereas somebody, and this is maybe a prejudice, a non-jumper ESTJ might be more like, oh no, but let's do it more traditionally. But the ENTJs are the ones, you get their attention, they get it, and they listen to you. And then you have to sell it to them. But then it's really a very honest, open relationship. Look, I need these deliverables. Can you deliver that? Yes, I can. I need a little bit of time here. There's some uncertainty. I will manage it for you. I love dealing with them. Decisions are very quickly made, but it's chill and effortless often. And INTJs are like working with, obviously, right? Because we're like sort of the team. ENTJs have a presence. They're normally, I mean, by nature, they're dominant, not in a bad way, which I kind of like, because I like people that are not in a work context where I don't have to worry about, did I just step on your toes? Did I get you upset? INTJs are a little more gentle, but they get the same shit done. They just have a different demeanor, right?
Yeah, and kind of going off of that, I would say that, granted, I actually don't know many INTJs in my personal life, but I think oftentimes when you are assessing type, you see what is extroverted, and so for me that would be extroverted thinking. And yes, I do get work done, but I do tend to be kind of on the sidelines. I notice that it's almost like this stereotypical owl, almost like I like to observe, and I also like to contribute, but I don't like that to be completely evident. And I think that if you talk with me though, is when you really get my NI, in the sense that I always extrapolate small things into huge things. One of my favorite mottos is, how you do anything is how you do everything. And so oftentimes small things that I discuss have larger implications, but I think that can be a little bit more difficult to suss out or identify.
That's actually something I was going to say about kind of how I find, because like I said, similar to Boris, I've kind of like one way or another successfully found like 4 or 5 INTJs in my life, and at least some I'm pretty sure on. And one thing I notice is that what you said, Lauren, about like taking it to like a bigger picture is something that I always am looking for. And a lot of times, I mean, NFs do this too, but a lot of times that's kind of what I like see like in an N type, what I'm looking for. And when I can kind of speak the intuitive language with them is the best way I can put it. And I always notice the way that I always see like NJs specifically is that when they're doing that, they always bring up like what their end goal is and like what they want to achieve. And so I think maybe Boris, that's why you're saying like when you work with ENTJs, it's like easier, and it's I relate to what you're saying too, where it's like once I know what someone like is trying to do, I feel like I can help them a lot easier. But for me, it's like I don't always necessarily like think that way by default. So I do think that's kind of why like the NP-NJ dynamic works a lot of the times for being effective. So that's kind of what I look for, at least.
Yeah, and something that you just mentioned, I don't know why this just made me think of it, but I always have to finish what I start. And not only that, but it has to be done almost perfectly. And this is where my NI gets in the way, because I will ruminate over something. And again, I'd rather measure twice, cut once. But I will ruminate over something, and I have to create almost this creative space for myself over time. But I will see it to completion, whether it takes 6 months or a year. I always see what I start to completion. I have to close the loop, to echo what Joyce was saying earlier.
I look for that in NI in general. After I met my, like I said, NI dominant wife, it's like I see the same thing in NI all over the place these days. Like I feel like I'm getting pretty good at picking up that type. Like if you're an intuitive type, you can see like they need to finish things, and if they're an NI type, and then if they're an NE type, a lot of times they just only like starting things or even thinking about starting things.
Yeah.
That said, I don't want to say anything about INTPs. I like working with INTPs, and what I admire about INTPs is I like TI. I like to see things complete, but I cut corners at a certain point. I cut things off. But often, for example, in our meetup, there's this one guy, Alex. He is really good at an objective personality system. I can delegate to them because they will have actually dotted more I's and crossed more T's. They know the stuff by heart. You got to listen. You might miss something, but they're more rigorous than I am because I'm willing to live in the other world, cut off a tangent more easily. But if I need expertise, I say, okay, INTP, go. And they go, and they know their stuff more than I do. Unless, I can, but I have to put an effort saying, I want to spend that much time on this. There'll be distractions. I might want to learn something else. So that by default, they normally know their stuff better. I can dig in there, but it takes effort. They know their stuff by nature because they don't stop till they know it.
I was gonna say, yeah, that's something that I feel is like a trait of an INTP that I feel a lot, is that like I know what I know, and I usually have a good feeling if I don't know something, and I usually tell people that like I try to keep stock of like what I think I'm good at and can pull off, and I try not to sign up for things where I like the expectation is to be good, but I'm not sure I'm good at it. So that sounds like a lot of INTP traits that I've seen.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We're seeing a lot of differences within the workplace of these types. Boris talked about earlier about how he knows he met another ENTP when they're able to kind of be playful with each other. What I noticed with EPs in general, so if there was a trend, EPs would be like the most playful grouping of types. And so Lauren mentioned perfection. So, introverts tend to have a more perfectionistic slant to them in different ways. And so that's one way you can also spot those types. Any other points anyone wants to mention?
I would say, like I said, I love each and for ours, all of the other analyst types, ENTP, INTJ, INTP. What I really love individually about each one of them, I had to simplify it, is like if I need idea on, let's say if I need a very broad idea, I would go to a ENTP for that broad idea. So let's say if it's something I want to be really creative on, I would go to a ENTP. Because they also they have an intelligent way of knowing how to get something done, but also in the sense of, like you said, like that playfulness and that creativity. With an INTP, what I usually go to, and like I said, my best friend is sometimes I go to them a lot to make sure if I'm making the right decision. My best, like I said, he's an INTP, and oftentimes he's the only one that can convince me at times if what I'm doing is the idea of my thinking is, am I moving too fast or am I moving too slow? Because I love the logical perspectives that they have on a lot of things. Like I'm listening to Josh this entire time, and I'm just mesmerized. Like, man, what he's saying is so spot on. And with the INTJ friend, it's like, even with Lauren, it's funny because my other INTJ friend, we're always relatable. Like we talk almost daily, And usually we're talking about how to get certain things done. But it's so funny because even him, he will still see things from a lot of different perspectives. And he has no problem telling me that I'm wrong. So it helps me to slow down on my decision making a lot too. So those are some of the things I would say I notice about each one of those types that I love. And definitely with the INTJ, you'll see that much bigger picture of things they want to get done and things they want to see happen. And they kind of have and I always say this, never lie to INTJ because it'll always come back and bite you. So
You lie? ENTJs lie? That's a terrible thing. Who lies around
no.
here?
Silly. And so one of the ways that you can tell apart an INTJ and an ENTJ is how constantly active they are. So Deon, his schedule is filled up to the brim and he's like constantly on the go. He's just doing stuff. Whereas with INTJs, you'll have someone who's more in their head, thinking about the meaning of things, the why behind things. And sometimes that causes inaction, actually. So sometimes NI-DOMs struggle with action because they can see how so many things are arbitrary. Does that make sense? So like you can have people who are so confident, like what Lauren's saying, that tomorrow is Saturday or something. But just because people agree on it, it just makes it a little speck in the dust of what actually is the case, right? And so NI is able to see everyone's perspective is just a perspective. And so sometimes it can go like, okay, I have information, but at the end of the day, it seems kind of arbitrary because one isn't necessarily better than the other. So there's a lot of gray area that NI can go in. And so NI sometimes, as it's kind of understanding the different points of view, it can kind of go like, you know what? They all kind of make sense and they all kind of don't make sense at the same time. So
That's something my wife, my INFJ wife, always says, is that it's like hard to like hate someone when you like know everyone's motivation. And I feel like that's what she has with that. And I understand what she means and like I agree, but also in my opinion, like it's not that hard to like judge certain things on like the outcomes. So like that's always something I understand, but I don't necessarily relate to.
I would say that I do somewhat like, because you have to fall down on a decision, right? So sometimes I do fall on judgment, but I would also agree with your wife, and this is my NI, in that it's really hard to hate people up close. And I'm convinced that when you have a distaste for somebody, it's because you're not curious enough and you're not getting close enough. More often than not, unless you're a complete psychopath, I think that you just need to get closer, usually to that individual, and stay curious and ask questions to find more insight. And to kind of touch on what you were saying, Joyce, and that INTJs are more often in their head than an ENTJ, would agree entirely. But what's interesting is that my schedule for the last year has been incredibly hectic in the sense that, I mean, when you sign up to do a residency, which is what I just completed this past year, you pretty much commit yourself to spend a minimum of 12 hours a day in a hospital, including weekends, most weekends. And that is also filled with a lot of projects. And so I think to an outside observer, one would think that, oh, she's an ENTJ or something of the like. But more often than not, to kind of touch on what you were saying, I frequently get caught up in my own head and my own NI in taking action on a lot of these projects. So despite the fact that these projects are required of me and there are specific deadlines on these things, I would frequently have to ruminate on them. And frequently my feedback was, I just don't have enough time to think about it, which is probably why I actually have the disposition that I did with Josh, and that, well, you have to move forward anyway, because time moves on with or without you. And it's really because I've seen the fault in my NI.
That's super fascinating, Lauren. There's also something very interesting about you as well, in that, Lauren, you completed your PhD at a very young age. Like, you fast-tracked your education so hardcore. And I find people who tend to do that, there's a trend towards them being TJs. I know a lot of TJs in my personal life, people who tend to get their PhD at such an early age. it's more likely. I'm saying other types can do this as well, but I find you're going to see a majority of them being TJs who fast track their education that hardcore.
Yeah, and I think that you bring up a great point that I've kind of thought about as well, and that with TJs, we clearly have TE in our stack, and so everything is timeline oriented, and so we prioritize our resources. And to me, that has always been time, which is why my life exists on a timeline. And without even noticing it before I even had a language for type, I didn't realize that I was prioritizing, school, career, and I kind of feel like I got signed up for a pyramid scheme, because they tell you that if you do a straight through 6-year program, you can get your PharmD. But they don't tell you that if you want a meaningful and fulfilling job, you have to complete 2 more years of residency. So I signed up for an 8-year program, evidently, that I didn't think that I signed up for. But yeah, that is something that I noticed with TJs as well, is that they tend to prioritize their resources, whether it's, time, money, but usually time. And that's actually how I've identified what's important to me, is what I've placed at the forefront of my life, which has been career initially. And of course, this comes at the cost of, relationships and really forming those relationships and feelings.
That is a very great point. I think, and especially, it's a TJ thing, especially for ENTJs. One of the things that I hate doing is wasting time, energy, and resources. And that's always allowed me to know instantly what kind of path I want to take versus ones I didn't. It's funny because when I actually started working, and this is going to sound so odd, but I actually enjoyed working even when I was very young. One of my very first jobs was cleaning office buildings with my uncle, and I was doing that at 6 years old. And we would have a little thing where whoever could get it done the fastest would get candy, and I will always make sure the fastest way of me getting mine done before my other cousins did, so that I could get candy. What time is a big thing for me, and I think and that's the reason why I don't like to spend too much time for information, because I feel like at the basic core of human beings, we don't have enough time in a day to try to process everything as much as we would like to. We don't have time to process a lot of things that we would could talk about all day long, because I enjoy those kind of like I said, those abstract things or those philosophical things. But it's just like every human being, we get up, we really only have about 8 hours a day to ourselves out of a 24-hour time span, because 8 of them we spend sleeping, 8 of them working, and then the next 8 is at home trying to, redo things or clean up or whatever. So even in education, I'm personally someone who didn't go to college and always wanted to shoot, but always and the reason being that is because originally I wanted to be a psychologist, but it always came back to the time thing. I'm like, oh, I don't know if I want to spend 8 years in school, because what can happen in 8 years? And a lot has happened in 8 years, just with my personal life, from my health, life situations and things like that. So it wasn't, I've had multiple different interests, but it always had to be about, timing and how much resources I was getting from a particular field if I did pick something. So I would say based upon what Lauren is saying, that's very true. TJ value time a lot. And that's why I really don't care much for processes, more so the end result. But that gets me in trouble a lot, because the process can be the funnest part at times. But it's I'm always been rushing things. So I used to have this kind of mantra of before 35, I want to retire from my work, so that I can kind of play and spend more time on those abstract things or possibilities. But if I spent too much time trying to do these things, I don't know what can happen to me at 40 or 50 years old. But my mind goes, what do most 40, 50-year-olds do? Which is just basically watch TV and do nothing. And I think the difference between the INTJ and ENTJ is I'm always finding things to do, even if it's not a part of a responsibility, because I like more possibilities of seeing what can be possible. So that's why my schedule is like that. So I'm waking up early in the morning, Joyce, like I was showing my schedule, I'm waking up that early in the morning and I'm doing all these different things because I want to see what's the possibility of this and what's the possibility of that. And then I give myself time to where, like I said, I really enjoy reading. So I got all these different books, and I'm usually trying to pull information out of it that I can use quickly, as opposed to just like, well, I'm enjoying this book. Even though I do enjoy it, but I'm always trying to find the information I can use. Then I'm going to working out. So I'm trying to find more. I like to expend a lot of energy from start to finish, as opposed to when I know I'm going to be getting distracted with multiple different things. So I can see all these various possibilities or getting things done because of the timing of what I should say like this, for things I will have time for versus the things I really don't have time for. So that's what my best illustration would be for, TJs and timing.
So it sounds like classic ENTJ. Basically, you always want to be hustling.
Yeah.
You always want to be on something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, ENTJ, classic move.
It's really due to those possibilities, man. Like it's funny because ENTJs always say this: as much as we work hard, we also have this really big sense of wanting to play. So I do that. Like I always, and we're very visualizing kind of type of people. So I'm always like, I know that I've always said, like, once I've done all the success I want to have a really big party with all my family and friends who helped me get to where I got to. And really what it is me giving back. Like I want to, like I had this idea in my head of like, one day I want to get this mansion, but I want to buy it out, but not for me. I want to do it for my friends and family so that they'll always have a place to stay or a place they can have a vacation at. Or like if I'm, let's say, I last year I did, well, not last year, but the year before the coronavirus, I did like this black party, and where we got all dressed up. We went to I stay in Michigan. We went downtown Detroit to kind of take pictures and things like that. And I know it's kind of a vague thing, but it was like a good memory thing of like, let's get dressed up and kind of like, have a nice good time. But I worked and saved a lot of money to be able to do so for them to be able to do that. So I think
it sounds like basically like it's that candy thing you were talking about before. Like you're always like keeping in mind like the rewards of things down the line, like what your actions have consequences. Therefore, like you want to make sure you get the rewards. Like it's interesting to hear that, because that's what I've heard a lot of like NI people say, and I always think like it's interesting to me that you can keep the rewards in mind that much, because for me it's like, kind of like Boris is saying, like the activity itself has to be the reward. I think that's an NE thing largely, because I think that like I move on so quick. I have no possibilities. Like there's no guarantee, and I'm very aware of that. That like put in product A, it comes out as product B. To me, it's like that's just crazy talk to think that things are that like that specific. But I do think that there's just, I mean, obviously personality and then maybe just like life circumstances and stuff that lead you to think that way, like different people. And I think it just goes to show that like we do need like everybody thinking on different wavelengths to get things done. Because I always say like if everything was left to me, nothing would get done. But then when I'm in a flow state, I know that I achieve things that like other people wouldn't be able to do very easily too. So yeah, I think that that's an interesting like difference in perspective there.
Yeah, so it seems like the TJs like to front end their work. It's like they want to get their career done and they want to get like all these things done first, and then they can enjoy themselves later. It's like, okay, when those things are settled, then we can have a party and go like, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. It's like that candy metaphor all over again. I was noticing what Deon was saying. He's saying, I want to do this so I can have a party. And I was thinking like, oh, I love that idea. But for me, it's like I have to do this and it's a little bit of a party the whole time. Otherwise, I won't want to do it.
It goes back to how judgers, they're more work before play, especially TJs though. TJs are way more work before play. And then with the P types, they're known for playing while they work. So it's like, yeah, sure.
Exactly.
But
that's why when, just real quick, I'll let you go, Lauren, but when you're talking about being a med student, I was thinking like, yeah, I can't imagine committing to anything for 8 years. Like I've had my job for like, I've been at this company for over 10 years, but I had every single year, it's like, no, this might be the last year. It's I can't like live with that kind of commitment.
I don't know that I could have either if I fully knew that I was going to spend 8 years in the craft.
I feel like I was aware of it, and that's why like I don't like that kind of commitment, because I can't stop thinking about like what if like circumstances change.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, pharmacy is different than med school too, because in med school you have 4 years of undergrad, 4 years of med school, and then your residency, and that's expected. Pharmacy is just kind of become more specialized in the last decade plus. Residencies are somewhat new, but I wanted to comment on, it's interesting because play seems like a very and maybe this is just my own bias, like a very SE thing, like SE tertiary for Deon as an ENTJ. But I find fulfillment and almost like my play is in my work. And so I think that while I am a judger and I do have to fall on decisions and what gets work done, I'm moving more recently towards trying to be more process focused and finding kind of the beauty in the process and the fulfillment that there is in today, and in trying to access more of my SE as my blind spot and my aspiration, because if I'm always so future focused, I'll never be, I guess, happy. Truly happy, and I guess it depends on what you define that as. But I guess all that to say, I am trying to be more process focused and less focused on play. I don't actually see an end, and maybe it's just where I am in life right now and accepting a new career opportunity, and I'm kind of ambitious and looking forward to that. But part of me almost doesn't care about the retirement aspect because I enjoy it now. Like, I love it now. And I've spent, the last 8 years dedicating, really working my ass off. Can I say that on here?
I don't know. We have to see the result. I don't know.
It's not CBS, so no, I'm just saying.
But like, spent the last 8 years like working my ass off for this. But now it is kind of this is my own version of play, and I find fulfillment in that now. So, for what it's worth.
Yeah, I do. I keep bringing it up just because I have obviously a lot of experience with my INFJ wife, and that's where most of my like IJ experience along with my INTJ friends comes from. But one thing that I always think of, so I have diagnosed ADHD, so I read a lot about like brain chemistry and stuff. And one thing that I notice is like I need dopamine, which is like the feel good chemical, and that's in short supply. But I notice like IJs need like serotonin, which is like what you get when you have accomplishments. So it's like it's I do think there's like fundamentally like physically a difference in the brain's perception of that kind of thing. Like if I'm not, let's just say, having like 1 unit of fun like every like 5 minutes, like my brain just goes like, yeah, stop, do something else. But then it's like, seems like IJs, like I said, can keep like a goal in mind, and then that big flood of serotonin or whatever it really is at the end like pays off for that. And it's like, for me, I don't think it works that way as much as I'd like it to. A lot of times it's like it's a different approach completely.
Another thing for me is like I'm trying to get as much done as possible literally before I die. Not in a negative pessimistic sense, but I just don't think humans realize like how short life can be. And that's what I think people don't account for, is the immediate factor in our lives is life. And so it's like, how can I stay in one thing or have all this different? To me, it's just too much time wasting. How can I be involved with so much information or too much action? And it's funny because even though I am more action oriented, it's like I can't be all the way action oriented, because then I will miss the process if I'm too action oriented. But then if I'm too focused on the information part, then I won't be able to get to the goals I want to accomplish. Because it's a very sad thing when you see that people are, and I'm not just saying this because of my illness or anything like that, but it's all, even when I was younger, it's a very sad thing to see that people don't, some people didn't make it past 20 years old, some people didn't make it to 30. And it's just like, I don't think people see themselves in the long run in time in different things. So it's like when you get 50, 60 years old, 70 years old, it's like, then what? And so that's the quality of life I feel like where a lot of people miss out on. So like for me, the difference is like, how Lauren is talking about her work. My every goal I have has an end game reason, and that's being because you just don't know what can happen in life. So I'm like expecting that at this particular age, I would like to have this thing done. Now, if it goes on across a little bit longer, that's just the reality of things. But I can't just sit there because I'm a kind of person too. I'm kind of like you in a sense as well, Josh, where I don't just like sticking to things just for the sake of sticking to it. I think it's more so like I stick to it because like I said, I know it serves its end purpose at a particular time so that I can move on to doing what I want to do once I'm past a certain age. It's more so like, okay, I've been there, done that. What's the next thing? I've been there, done that. What's the next thing? And I often find myself doing that in conversation with a lot with people too. And that's where ENTJs get this kind of reputation for sometimes being harsh or a little too blunt if it's a more, feeling kind of type, because I could be like, oh yeah, I was like that when I was this age or that age. And sometimes I feel like when I'm having conversations, I'm in this time loop and I'm just like, and literally I'm thinking in my head, like, just get over it, move forward, take some accountability, because at the end of the day, your decisions are the reason why you end up where you are. So, and if you don't get in control of those decisions and things are just happening until you're always going to be in like this little wandering spiraling effect of negativity. And it's because you're not realizing where it's coming from, because you're just kind of just doing things without realizing what meaning, I guess that's where the NI comes in for me, of why these certain things are important. So for me, it's about literally trying to do everything I can, because you just never know what can happen in 5 to 10 years. And so that's why I plan certain things out so that I can say that once I get there, I've done these many different things, kind of like living life to the fullest kind of type of deal. But in the same sense, it's like, it's because I want to experience all these different things before, something could hypothetically happen. So
It's interesting because like you're like the flip inverted functions of an INTP, and
yeah.
I agree with everything you say until you get to like your takeaway, and I'm like, oh, I'm the opposite though. It's like I agree. It's like I want us to have all these experiences, like all the same stuff you're saying, but then it's like I think, and as you know, fate is random, and that the dice are cast. There's nothing you can do about it. You're like, it's almost the opposite of your takeaway, which is that you're the product of your decisions. I take like the opposite approach of like, your decisions are only a small part of like what ends up happening. So it's very interesting.
So what Lauren and Deon mentioned was the end of their life. So Lauren was like, you got to enjoy the process because you're going to die one day and you don't want to be like always focused on the end. And then Deon's like, you got to do shit all the time because you're going to die at the end. And I'm like, do NI users just have their end of their entire life in mind at all times? So even like, I don't know.
Joyce, you are one. What do you say?
Yeah, like for me, I always think about if I'm proud of my life at this point, if I died right now. And that's been quite natural for me. Like my whole life, I've had kind of the scale of my death in mind, always. Like always.
I wonder if that's
It's never
generally like
not
intuitive, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like never not there. But it seems like the NI Dom kind of feels like they need to use that NI understanding that you will die to orient how you're going to live your life. So it seems like Lauren's philosophy causes her to want to enjoy the process. So it seems like it was something that she deliberately did because she kept the end of her life in mind. And then she changed her actions because she is considering the end of her life. And Deon, he not only thinks about dying, but he actually starts to change things in his life to orient how he sees death and try to incorporate that with how he lives his life. Whereas what if like NE, it does consider that too, because like in all intuition considers, a large scope. But I wonder if NE is more likely sometimes to see it as a thought experiment. So it's like, I'm going to die. This is a thought experiment. They're not as quick as the NTJs to like actually like change their actions around their NI philosophy. So it almost seems like if you think this, then you literally need to orient your life so then you can create a life that honors that NI. So it almost seems like, and I mean, an NTP could do that too, but they might take a little longer to arrive at that perhaps. And another element of what Deon was talking about was the element of prioritizing. So it seems like he wants to be able to prioritize things in order to meet his goals, right? It goes back to the serotonin and dopamine, right? People who have a reward system that's more serotonin based will be a little better at prioritizing because they're all working towards an end aim. Whereas if you're more dopamine based, then it's going to be a little more hard to kind of keep the ends in mind because it's going to not be as rewarding. So I don't know. There was that too.
Yeah.
And
Basically, like from my NE perspective, I feel like I had like an existential crisis from like a maybe too young of an age a lot of ways. And I used to test INTJ like around that time. And I actually feel like that did, since I was so young, it did maybe have an effect on my personality where I kind of had the realization, like, I don't necessarily want to like get to the end, like the you know, close the last chapter of my book and just have a list of accomplishments. I want to know that like I felt like myself and I had a good time doing it. And I think that's I think about that quite a bit, and that's kind of how I ended up like with living the life I do, where it's I wouldn't say that I don't have goals, I wouldn't say any of that stuff, but it's all trying to take the next step to get whatever it is that I want to get, and then not thinking too much farther past that. Maybe 2 steps. It's like I can sit there, I could think about all these different things, but I know that in the end of the day, I can only assess like what I see now and maybe a few steps ahead of time. So I think of I relate to a lot of like ESTPs and stuff when they talk about the way they see SE. I think that like NE has a similar approach to SE in that manner, and it's just projecting even a little bit farther than just like current reality. So I relate a lot to what Deon said, but again, it's like interesting because I take kind of a different like flop side to it.
Just to throw something in the mix, so it could actually, I mean, I'm a few years older than most of you guys. As time goes on, though, even though you're an NE Dom, you realize NE knows all this is possible, but you also start to appreciate opportunity cost. So there's things that I really don't like doing. I don't have a TV. If I'm watching TV with a friend and they're watching commercials for 20 minutes, I'm saying that's a waste of time. If I watch TV, what I do is I tape the show ahead of time, and at minute 25, I'll start watching what I taped. I don't need to watch all the shit commercial. So the more you age, even or the more you realize time is limited. I want to drink it all because I have NE, but I need to be better at prioritizing because there's opportunity cost, right? So
yeah, exactly. That's what I was talking about too. Yeah, 100%.
It might be slightly different initial motivation than Deon, but it can look almost the same after a while, right?
Right. I always feel like I'm time blind in the moment, but like Boris is saying, like I'm always thinking like, is this a good use of my time? Is this a good use of my time? Like I watch YouTube videos on like 2 times speed sometimes. It's
I do that too.
Yeah, it's exactly I'm aware of that there's like this impending doom or whatever, but then also it's like it's always a constant battle because I want to be having fun, I want to be feeling myself, I want to get some accomplishments, but it's like I just like no matter how hard I try, I don't think I could have that like driven like focus that like an IJ or an EJ would have. It just like it doesn't work that way for me.
Mm-hmm.
That just makes me wonder that what provides you a sense of purpose, both Josh and Boris, or and maybe purpose is too like ambitious as well, but what gives you fulfillment?
That's a great question.
See, I think it's something that lives in the moment. It's an experience. Experiences can be super precious. Like I said that in another context, there's sometimes little things or dancing in a rain with a rainbow somewhere in a weird place with a stranger. It's so precious, and that's all life is a sequence of experiences that you might remember. You get to experience in, and they become part of what your consciousness is. They're part of your being you, but they're fleeting. I know they're fleeting. I like to accumulate them, and some of them I hold on. So I'm not that into material goods, and I wonder if in the long run, I think for me and possibly for Josh, as we mature, we might be more appreciative of the long term. I wonder if somebody that's driven as Deon might go the other way. They say, yes, I worked 15 years really hard, but I need to have a little bit of fun along the way. So we both come to it from different sides, but we might almost meet in the middle just because we started out in an extreme, right? So
yeah, exactly. Actually, I feel like I have an example of exactly what you're talking about, Boris. My dad, who for a long time I thought was an ISTP, and I finally had him take the test, and he tested ENTJ, and that made a lot of sense for me because I think that's partially why like I'm less driven is because I kind of had like a parent figure doing the driving for me. I ended up looking this up, and apparently INTP children of ENTJs is really popular, or happens a lot. And it's funny, Boris, because he's I think he's almost 60 now, so he's getting up there. But he just like flipped a switch and went from like, I have to work as hard as I can at my job and like kill myself in doing it, to like, I want to live a nice life, and anyone who reminds me that, like, it's almost like a overly positive flip. It's so funny. He's driven either way. But it's he's saying a lot of the things that I used to like butt heads with him when I was a kid, of saying like, I'm not just gonna like kill myself every day at school to get a good grade when like a B is fine. and now he's like basically trying to like say the same things to me. So it's funny, like, again, the way the personality development grows and integration and everything, like you really do kind of meet in the middle and flip and then go from there.
Yeah, I kind of see type is where you start. So your type tells you where you start, but it doesn't tell you where you end. And so there is definitely that trend where the TJs actually, they learn over time to appreciate the process. But it's something like, it's like they're flipping from their initial view on it to a new view. Whereas like with an ENTP, they can care about the end result too, but it's almost like flipping from their initial, like enjoying the process and then realizing the results are important. So everyone kind of realizes the same things, but it's almost like, where do you start first? And where you start first is indicative of your type.
Mm-hmm.
And you will still always have a preference, but you get better at the other, right? Because
Because one of my biggest things I also fear, in a sense, is part of that low introverted feeling, inferior function. And so one of the biggest things that I have, that often gets me in trouble, is my family members are very, very important to me, but they always feel like that they're not. And so as I get older, I'm always trying to, like, they don't get, like, half the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing is because I do love them very much. But it comes across like sometimes like they're like, you what you said was mean, or you're a little too blunt, or whatever. And I'm like, oh, that's not the way I'm trying to come across, but this is what needs to be done. But what they don't know is I'm trying to do that for them. And so, we go back a little bit, just talking about the process and experience. The more I get older, because one thing I love about Boris and Josh, your particular types as well, is that the flexible thinking that you guys have. You're very flexible, adaptable thinkers. And so sometimes I don't want a lot of options, right? As a TJ, I don't always want a lot of options, but sometimes I'm starting to realize, like, the more options I give myself, the better I feel and the better I do, because it's like, oh, okay, now I have a new way of looking at that. And so when I go through the process, it's still that kind of like TENI thing of like, I don't really want to have to deal with this. I can kind of see where this is going. But then just to keep myself flexible, sometimes I've had some great, even better outcomes that I would have even thought about, just by, enjoying the process and remaining flexible. So even going to F5, like with my family members, like those being my, one of my gems or things I consider precious to myself, I often will some days purposely not try to give any solutions or try to get anything done, and just try to, share that love with my family members or personal close friends and things like that. And it's a very sensitive area for me, because I'm realizing that the more that I use FI, the more I'm able to, it's coming across as not as blunt anymore when I'm using it that way, but it's actually showing a lot of people that I'm actually coming from a very loving perspective, as opposed to that was kind of harsh because I'm trying to hide the feelings all the time. And I remember being a kid, I used to go to therapy a lot, and I would never open up, never talk to my therapist. I would literally tell my therapist, like, well, if you're a therapist, who talks to you when you have problems, right? And I'm just like, I would never open up, and I used to be angry a lot. I used to have very, very used to be very angry, and that's because I never would open up. So the first way of trying to create that defensive barrier to my FI, of not trying to feel vulnerable, because I think that's what ENTJs and INTJs, we don't like to feel vulnerable or weak. I would just try to try to stay focused on what was more important or go back to the reality of things. So I think that for me, that experience of going through processes helps me to be more open-minded and have more options, but it also has helped me to develop my FI a lot better as well.
That's actually something while you were talking, Deon, I forgot I wanted to say too, is I'm 31, close to 32, and I do feel like I'm starting to like truly develop that like last slot feeling. And so again, like what you're saying, I relate to a lot of in different ways with what Lauren was saying about how like what is it that like gets you out of bed in the morning, or like what is it that like is your life's purpose and stuff. And I basically, my answer would be that I don't know that I had any idea what that was for like 20 years. And then I just kind of was just going because it's just like I'm here, I guess I'll just go. And I feel more that I'm getting to a point where I'm starting to understand like meaning of life, like for myself and stuff, as I'm entering my 30s. And I pretty frequently chalk that up to having a feeling function in my very last slot, because it took so long to get to that point. Like I would say like the best way I could summarize is like what Jung himself said, like synchronicity, like kind of like Boris said, like that is a big thing for me when things line up and they just feel like perfect. That's like the type of like feeling I want to cultivate more and more and more. Mm-hmm. And then, I mean, that's a pretty like it's a hard thing to replicate. And that's why I don't always want to be driven towards something, because it's like, I feel like if I'm too driven, I'm sealing myself off to those kind of experiences. Mm-hmm. And you can't really predict very well when they come up. You can put yourself in situations where they're more likely to come up, but that's about the best you can do.
Right.
So yeah, and you might notice sometimes I use language. It's not like a typical like TI dominant. I think it's because I've been working on my feelings, especially. So
yeah,
also in therapy and all kinds of work.
Help a little, right?
Yeah, and it seems like we're talking about inferior functions right now. So I was wondering, Lauren and Boris, how do you experience your inferior function?
Ladies first, if you want.
You were already unmuted, so I wanted to pass the mic to you. I would say that I've kind of already outlined what my schedule has been for the last 2 years, but also 8 years. And that kind of came at the cost of really having to neglect, from kind of a protective standpoint as well, but your bodily feelings. So like from an SE perspective, my very last function. Throughout college, and even now, I was very into health, physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, really in all regards. And I loved weightlifting. I got back into Taekwondo in college. I started competing in Olympic style Taekwondo in college. And once residency started, it stopped and kind of fell off. And so throughout, what I'm, I suppose, trying to get at is that throughout my life, I've tried to incorporate really my inferior functions, like SE1. The one that I haven't mentioned is my tertiary, which is FI. And I think that FI kind of colors my almost entire perspective lately. FI is what appears to be my current growth point. I feel as though I am moving towards what feels authentic to me, and I very much value integrity, and I notice that comes up a lot in my practice on a day-to-day basis. I also notice that this is something that I kind of hold others to as well, that if you say that you're going to do something, then it is my expectation that you will follow through. Even if you tell me that you cannot do something, that's fine as well, as long as it remains consistent. And so lately, while I'm still clumsy, I'm so clumsy at FI, I'm trying to kind of let it color my perspective, especially when I'm taking care of critically ill patients. We've kind of discussed, life and death. And when you face this every day, it gives you a new appreciation for life, but you also have to approach it compassionately, especially if you're interacting with family members, but just in the care of patients in general. So long story short, I'm trying to incorporate FI into my really everyday practice. And hopefully moving forward, it creates a space to create more relationships with other individuals now that I have like 5 hours of my day back. And additionally, I am now getting back into weightlifting, and running Spartans, which are obstacle course races. And so trying to find a way to get out of my head, because I can get so caught in an I and in searching for meaning and inspiration and theoretical inspiration when you have to just live it out. I just have to live it out in practice, and really the rubber meets the road whenever I do that from an athletic perspective and living out those values.
Yeah, Joyce's question, I mean, you asked either for the inferior or the two lower functions. I think Lauren interpreted to talk about both lower functions. I think I have a pretty good relationship for myself for FE. I don't know if you're familiar with this objective personality system. I don't think I'm a jumper, meaning I'm inverting FE and TI, but I find they're close together. There might be historic reasons, because I've been around some difficult family members. I've dated some interesting people. So I feel very comfortable with FE. And I mean, it kind of imposes itself on you. I think I know with fairly good accuracy, what emotional state another person is in. I do have empathy. So FE, I'm very comfortable with. SI is almost the unloved child. I appreciate it, but it's almost like you appreciate a chest of drawers next to your table. It's the thing where I store stuff. It's important to have facts in there. I mean, simplified facts, but I'm not a big fan of SI. Like, I don't think I'll ever come into it and appreciate as much as I should. It's an accountant who does my taxes. It's necessary. I can appreciate, let's say I have an ISFJ friend. I see how neatly their place is organized. I can briefly appreciate it, but then I'm saying I would never do that, because this is a liability to even maintain it at that level. And it would actually annoy me, because I feel bad. What if I go in there and I disrupt their beautifully constructed order? I don't even mean to. So it's almost like I'd rather not interact with that environment, right? So FE, comfortable. SI it's a means to an end. I appreciate that it stores all the facts that NE can go into to rummage, knowing that they're just transient facts of the moment. I don't attach too much strong belief in this is how things are. This is how I believe things are. I got 500 little facts I can play with, and E can make connections. But yeah, I will never be super organized. I believe genius masters chaos, and I'm arrogant. I think I can do it.
That's lovely, Boris. Really well said. And so to add on to the INTJ's last function, extroverted sensing, I noticed the higher up NI is, the higher up introverted intuition is, the more someone cares about intentionality. So it's kind of like you want each thing you do to have a certain intention. And so what happens is when you throw SE at them, so you throw in the moment type of things they weren't expecting, it's almost like they need to figure out how to orient it in their intentions before they react in the moment. An SE Dom would be able to tell that an IJ or like an INTJ is kind of thinking in their mind how to make it more intentional each movement. And it's like, hey, just move your body. You don't have to make it all intentional and all mean something. Not everything has to mean something.
It does, though.
Yeah, like objectively, it technically does. So it's hard to like put that out of your mind, right? Like that's kind of how like I have my thinking being so high is like it's hard for me to ignore certain things, but I feel like as I'm developing FE, I'm starting to realize like I don't have to like say everything out loud. I could just like think it and know that like if I was to point these things out, it would like disturb that person. So that's where I think a lot of my like development of my final function comes in handy lately, at least.
That's the same thing. Sometimes I can say things out loud, and I'm starting to realize that you don't always have to, because I'm a dominant thinker as well, so you don't always have to say the first thing that comes to your mouth. And I for me, it's always, like I said, it's always kind of like looking at the action, and then I'm like kind of pointing it out, like, yep, that just happened. Yep, you just did this. I just did that. So that FI part now kind of makes me go, well, Deon, just be quiet. Don't even say anything before you get yourself in trouble. So
yeah, it's like I see it as like relying on your feelings, kind of like finally having some like faith in certain things, including like other people, at least for me with FE, and that's really where my development focus has been is letting people, having faith that people are gonna like take care of themselves, and then if it seems like they're not, then I can help out. But I try to give them some grace.
Well, maybe just to stir the pot here, it's how do we relate to feelers, right? Because this is an NT panel, but I mean, I love feelers because, well, the little bit of E I have, I can experience things that would not be in my nature by witness them and being with them and doing little things that cheer them up. It's almost like I'm feeding off their joys, also their pains. So I really, I'm not anti-feelers at all. Even though when it comes to making decisions under duress, if somebody's extremely driven by feelings and there is no logic, it baffles me and can frustrate me. But on the other hand, through being in their presence, I get to experience things that I myself probably wouldn't, at least to that extent. And it's not even utilitarian. I do. There's something nice to, like, we have this group in Toronto. I mean, the feelers on the land side, often the thinkers are together, but it's nice to mix the groups and have a different core vibe. So I do not want to put feelers down in any way or form, right?
Yeah, that's like society, right? It's all of us mixing together to create like its own new thing.
The way I kind of feel about fillers is that they're very authentic. They have a certain kind of confidence of like, and it irritates me, but I also love them at the same time. They have this kind of sense of authenticity that I think none of the NTs really have. I think whether you're SF or NF, they have this sense of being able to really harmonize with people and certain things where it's like, you know, oftentimes they say as NT types that we come across as pessimistic, which I don't agree with at all. But I think with filler types, they always have like this very optimistic, very short viewed, but very optimistic approach and thought process behind people. They're always trying to find the good in people, even if the people are the most baddest, scummiest person on the earth. I think fillers would actually be the kind of people who should have been like, give Ted Bundy a second chance. So but they're well appreciated because it's like they want you to open up to them, but it's in a sense of what I'm always wondering is like, do you want me to open up because you're trying to make me vulnerable, or do you really want me to open up because you care? And most of the time it's really because they genuinely care. So my brother is an ENFJ, and it's funny how me and him work a room and I watched us do it. Like for me, I'm always interested in when I'm talking to people about what they do, what they want to accomplish, you know, how does this relate to what, you know, whatever they're doing now, how does this relate to another situation, like problem solving or solutions? Whereas my brother, he's just really just trying to find a connection. He would literally hang with people he feel like are less intelligent than him and don't need an intelligence conversation if he felt like he made a connection with them just to help them feel better. So that's one of the beauties I see in filler types.
I think it kind of depends on, there's a gradient and kind of a spectrum here, and that it kind of depends on the health of the individual. And I would say that underdeveloped feelers can somewhat be frustrating because they tend to let really feelings override everything, and it can almost be erratic in a sense. But, you know, one of my best friends is an INFJ, and I love and respect her FE. And FI users are, I think it's so admirable because it's my tertiary function, and so it's almost beautiful to observe. But something that I aspire, I wish I could hold that same degree of, I don't know, it's just beautiful the way that people can utilize it. And so I actually quite enjoy observing individuals with both FE or FI and their stack, really regardless of type. And I think just all that to say, everyone else said it so eloquently. I think it just depends on the health of that individual and maybe, you know, circumstances as well.
Yeah, they have a lot to teach us NTs, even if it's by being a bad example sometimes.
My two of my other best friends, they're ENFP and INFP, and the ENFP is just like, it's kind of like the love overgoes the respect, and majority of what I value is respect. But this guy is like, he's like, you always have like those top two best friends, and he's definitely up there. And it's just like, even though he's a very emotional guy, you just cannot help but love him. And that just makes you want to respect him because he's such a solid guy. Everybody loves this guy, no matter where he goes. Very sociable, very loved. And you know, I sometimes I'm like, and that's one of the things he kind of helped me balance myself out a lot too, because what he helped me to do was be a lot more emotional. And then what I helped him to do was be a lot more stern and realize like everybody doesn't have your best interest at heart. So you need to be careful. And then I have my other friend, he's an INFP. And, you know, they say that INFPs and ENTJs get along pretty well as well. And it's funny because oftentimes our conversations, I don't have to have any like sense of like, we both can flip. So like he always enjoys the conversations about when we're talking about work and conversation and things like that. And then I'm always enjoying his conversations about, you know, what he did, what he was able to do with his wife or how his family is doing and things like that. Because him leading with FI first and me having with it last, it's kind of like a breath of fresh air to be able to talk authentically if I'm feeling like I'm actually sad or down about something, as opposed to just always kind of like defending myself with TE or NI, as opposed to, you know, my third and my tertiary and inferior function.
Cool beans. All right. That was really great commentary, everyone. Deon mentioned how, you know, sometimes he views feelers as very short term. And I was like, I've actually heard that quite a few times from thinkers, like viewing feelers. Someone has said that to me recently, and I was like, no, I consider myself like the most long-term ever. But I realized that following your feelings or following your heart can seem kind of short-term to thinkers who are like, use your head when you make decisions. As a feeler, I was telling someone about the importance of love, intimacy, and vulnerability. And they're like, you're so short-sighted, Joyce. And I'm like, what? I think these things are really important. I think you're nurturing the long-term by caring about these things. But it seems like there's like a I don't know. I thought it was really interesting, the difference in priorities or the difference in how we view each other's argumentation. That was just fascinating. So a sign that someone has inferior feeling or even lower down feeling is like following your heart as short term. Wow. Okay. Fascinating. Cool. And so thank you everyone for coming out and sharing your perspective on the NG temperament. This was a really grand dandy time. You know, Deon's always looking to get things done. He's like, yeah, I'm going to finish this project and this project and this project and this project. You're kicking all gears on high drive. I'm imagining you with your stack of 50 books, but you only read the sections that are important to get things done. You're like, only the parts that I'm going to use, I'm going to read. And I'm like, wow, that is really efficient with your time. And your time is no joke. You really try to maximize what you're doing within all your periods of time. Always looking to achieve the next goalpost and then the next one after that. And you're really hardcore. Wow. Whenever I see a TE Dom, I'm like questioning my life and thinking that I should work harder. And I'm like, wow, I need to also, I need to adopt that. Everyone around a TE Dom is like, man, I thought I was a type A personality. Never mind, man. That TE Dom wins the A prize for type A personality. Dang, that's awesome. And Josh, I really like your approach to life, you know, keeping your options open, kind of taking life in a more day-by-day approach. You know, you're thinking about all the possibilities of all the ideas, but it seems like you're very open to whatever life presents to you. It's like you're not trying to impose a goal or you're not trying to impose a plan onto life, but you're like, you know what, life happened to me and I will enjoy it. You have these really well thought out ideas and you bring up points that I've never thought of before. And that's something extroverted intuition is gold at. It's great at bringing up ideas that I would not consider otherwise. And I was like, like you brought up some really fascinating concepts like the dopamine and the serotonin. NE is closer to dopamine and NI is closer to serotonin. And I've never heard it put that way. So you're good at spinning concepts in a way that has never been imagined in that way before. Extroverted intuition is known for taking one idea from one domain and applying it to a totally different domain or totally different discipline. It's known as transcontextual thinking or cross-contextual thinking. So you were able to bridge.
Wide-reaching, right?
Yeah, you were able to bridge brain science with type. And that was a really fascinating connection you made.
So I'm always trying to do with that NETI. Yep. Bring everything together in a roundabout way.
Yeah, you brought your A game to that.
Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Vazzaroth. And thank you, Boris, for just hosting the meetups in our area. You're a very silly and goofy character, and you know how to bring
Excuse
a
me,
smile.
did you just call me goofy?
You are goofy.
I hope none of my work colleagues looks at it, because I have a totally different persona in a work context.
You always like to find ways to poke fun at people. Like you'll notice something that you could joust at, just kind of like poke at me and kind of like get me, I don't know, to react.
You look very pokeable. I don't mean to hurt, I just mean to... But if you blush, that's okay, because you got to get comfortable with blushing. That's the only way to overcome blushing. Oh my God. You can edit it. You can make a little white screen afterwards. I'm just kidding. Okay.
Yeah, people used to call me tomato because I would turn really red. Thank you, Boris. Thank you for showing my tomato.
Tomato.
Oh my gosh. Boris is the king of teasing. He will like tease you until you are at your gravestone, I swear. And yeah, Lauren, thank you for those really eloquently put thoughts on putting things into perspective. What I really appreciate about you, Lauren, is that you have this life philosophy, or you have these thoughts about life, and you really try to incorporate it into every facet of how you live. And so we can kind of tell, like, with each action you do, there is a specific reason for why you do it. Like everything is imbued with a very solid why. Like everything you do has like 10 folds of reasons why you did it. So I love that intentional approach that INTJs have, but every single thing they do actually has something like why they did that thing. And that's what people know about NIDOMs. Like they always did something for a reason. And so people close to them always know that every action implies purpose. So I really appreciate how every single drop of everything you do has a purpose behind it, whether or not people are able to decipher that purpose. People who know INTJs know that they'll put things in your path, or they'll kind of do things intentionally to either grow you or to teach you something, or it all means something. And so it's really nice to have that INTJ purposeful intention in every single drop of everything you put your mind to doing. Yeah. So with NIDOMs, it's quite actually fascinating. It's like there's so many layers of meaning. It's like an onion. The more you go into it, the more layers of meaning you'll find that what they do has. And so it's like it doesn't have just one layer of meaning, but it is, this really means this, that means this, that means this. So it's like going down the layers. When INTJs do things, there's actually a depth to it, whether or not people realize. NI is able to layer meaning. It's just the more you go down, the more you really find, wow, there was so much thought put into every little thing. And it's incredibly purposeful. And so that's great. That's great, Lauren.
Thank you. You gotta stop having INTJs on your channel, because you're on to us, and that's against I have to be invulnerable, so this is hard for me. No, but I really appreciate that was so eloquently stated. And I don't know that I've ever put all of that together before, so thank you.
It's wild with NIDOMs, because even the little way they'll position them opening the door, it might have so much meaning imbued in it. Like, oh, I opened this specific section of the door because it implies that will allow that in this and this. So every single thing they orient in their lives literally has a purpose. That's one of the tells of an NIDOM.
Are you like that?
Yeah, that's what my best friend would always call me. She's like, with every single little thing you do, it's always imbued with meaning or purpose or intention. It's nothing is ever done just because. Nothing. And that's what people tend to appreciate about me. And I think that's what people also appreciate about INTJs too. Because it gets people to think about living their lives a little more intentionally. And so that's great.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah. So thank you everyone for coming out. I appreciate your NT thoughts, and I'll see everyone in the next episode.
See you.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, Joyce.